Governor, we're going to some listener emails. These were submitted on pamatters.com since our last program. And one of the most popular topics for our listeners every month is welfare. They love to give you some advice on what to do to curb fraud and other things. And here's an email from Shirley in Millersburg. And her question is, why are we expected to pay for other people's mistakes like pregnancy? We continue to reward them instead of making them accountable. Next door has 5 kids, and they're on welfare. They own 30 acres and just installed 2 large ponds. What is Tom Corbett going to do about all the corruption in welfare? We've talked about your efforts to weed out some of that fraud over our shows. So here's an opportunity to give us an update on how that's going.
Well, I believe it's going very well because there's a lot of people complaining about it, that we're weeding it out. The office under Secretary Gary Alexander has a number of different programs that they have been working with, and working on the TANF funds, working on the SNAP funds, the various funds there, trying to make sure that people are actually eligible for these funds because for the last few years, nobody was testing eligibility. The best way you can find fraud is to test eligibility. So, as you know, there are a number of stories out in the media right now complaining that we're testing eligibility. But I believe it's incumbent for the people of Pennsylvania, those who are on welfare and those who are not on welfare, that we test for eligibility to make sure only those people who are eligible under the guidelines are entitled to get that, and that it's not being wasted or abused or outright fraud committed. I hired a woman to head up the Inspector General's office, and she's doing a wonderful job in this, working very closely with Gary Alexander in the Secretary of DPW with a specific purpose of looking for the fraud. You don't find it all in 1 year. But that's one of the reasons you go back to the eligibility requirements and start enforcing eligibility requirements. That wasn't being done in the last few years of the last administration.
And this is a perfect segue to what's become known as an asset test, something that apparently is being kicked around at the Department of Public Welfare on food stamp recipients, whereas an applicant for food stamps, they would have their financial records checked. And if they had more than, I believe it's $2,000 cash in the bank, or if they had a second car that's worth more than, I believe it was around $4,600, they would be declared ineligible. Is that going to become reality, first of all? I know it was being talked about. Yeah, is that going to happen?
Well, first off, the asset test used to exist until 2008 when the prior administration said we're not going to enforce an asset test anymore. And you can imagine what happens if you say we're not going to enforce an asset test anymore. People can walk in the door and just say, I need it. And if there's no test on that, they're going to get monies that they aren't entitled to, monies that could have gone for somebody else. So we reinstitute, well, we didn't reinstitute. We've asked the federal government for the right to reinstitute. They will make the decision. Other states have it. Some states don't have it. I think it's incumbent if you are to get if you are to get money from the governments, that you should demonstrate your need for that. Next question is $2,000 too high or too low? Should it be higher? I think there'll be further discussions in that respect, but we just went back to what the test was in 2008 before the Rendell administration lifted the requirement of a test.
Now, Matt here thinks he's got a perfect way around that.
Well, let's not go there, but I guess I want to ask broadly, is an asset test effective? Because in theory, I could withdraw my money from the bank, put it under my mattress, and pass any asset test. Is this an effective measure?
Well, I think it's a start. I mean, it's very difficult. If somebody wants to deceive, commit the fraud, then it's going to be a harder time to find it. Most people, hopefully, wouldn't do that.
All right, we're going to move on to Suzanne from Stroudsburg, and Suzanne writes, please explain how Pennsylvania's child support laws can be revised so they're fair and equitable to responsible fathers. Under Pennsylvania's current scenario, even lawyers have stated that the child support laws are inequitable and routinely favor the mother regardless of her character, and the system does not demand that she be an equal contributor or gainfully employed according to her capability. And she sums up with this question: how can a good father get relief or help? It is true, is it not, that the family courts really do favor the mother in a lot of cases, even before they walk into the courtroom. And
the situation is I don't know. I don't practice in those areas.
Okay.
If I read the newspapers and hear stories by people, you would have to say yes to that. But I know the courts are going through a process right now. I know the Supreme Court sets up rules. The legislature sets up the eligibility requirements and the laws in regard to that. And if people think that needs to be moved, they really need to contact their local legislator to do that. Our laws today, including the child custody, were developed by the Pennsylvania General Assembly. So they're the ones that have to change it, and the court has to change it. There's been some recent changes when it comes to the mother versus the father. And what they're looking at, the rule is you're supposed to protect the children, not who's best isn't necessarily the mother. Used to be that case. But I know when it comes to funding the child, they're looking at the joint incomes, or they're supposed to look at the joint incomes of the two parents, and they're supposed to look at joint custody more than anything.